certified strength and conditioning specialist, here today to talk to you about the overhead press. Now, the overhead press is a great way to functionally train our strength for pushing overhead and also strengthen our deltoid muscles. However, it's also an exercise that gets overlooked for the functionality of how we maintain our range of motion to be able to push overhead. So not only will we be covering form and technique for strengthening purposes today, we will also be covering form and technique for maintaining your range of motion to be able to get into that shoulder external rotation, along with full shoulder abduction to be able to push overhead, while also covering ways to get shoulder flexion, full range of motion, just so we get a full circle perspective over the gluteohumeral joint. So if you're ready, let's go. So the first thing we'll be covering today is our shoulder range of motion and what we need to functionally be able to complete activities like our overhead press. To begin with, you need to be able to come out into 90 degrees of shoulder abduction. Along with that, coming into 90 degrees of shoulder external rotation. So again, that's 90 degrees of shoulder abduction, along with 90 degrees of shoulder external rotation. From that position, you'll need to then be able to come into 170 to 180 degrees of shoulder abduction to reach that full range of motion, and then maintain it back down to the 90 degrees of shoulder abduction. And then in a perfect world, it would also be wonderful to be able to have full range of motion into flexion, coming into 170 to 180 degrees of shoulder active forward flexion as well, just so that we're making sure we have full range in that shoulder joint as to reduce any chance of injury with completed weighted task overhead. Now, as anything, as we look at it through a strength and conditioning perspective and also a functional perspective, I want to encourage you to make sure that you have this full range of motion or within the functional limits that I'm giving you in the range of motion to perform this exercise with no weight before adding on the weight in order to reduce your risk of injury, and also to teach that joint how to move functionally with no weight before you add on a load. Now, what if you don't have that range of motion? Because many of us don't, or as we go through our lives, we start to lose the range of motion, which is difficult because you still need to be able to push things overhead, grab things from overhead. And that's why I also want to encourage, while you work on your overhead press, you also work functionally on your shoulder flexion into a full 170, 180 degrees of shoulder range of motion as well. So again, we're just tackling this from all perspectives, because in a functional world, you are not grabbing something at 90 degrees shoulder abduction and 90 degrees external rotation and pushing it up over this way, right? You're kind of in this scaption field where you're in this 45-degree angle, holding an object and then raising it up overhead. So let's start first with our range of motion in our shoulder, and exercise that you can do to maintain or to obtain that range of motion. We're gonna have our handy dandy broom again to help us with some of this motion, as we're going to be doing active assistive range of motion to increase your range of motion in those fields. First is our external rotation. I want you to start down at 0 degrees of shoulder abduction, and then just flex your elbow to 90 degrees. What you're going to do next, palm is up in my other hand. I'm keeping my elbow glued to my side as I rotate out, keeping that elbow in, trying to get to 90 degrees and coming back in. Rotate out and push, shoulder staying down away from the ear, so we're not cranking it up, and back in. When you first get that, then you can start working that shoulder up into higher ranges of shoulder abduction until we can work on this 90 degrees range of motion of external rotation and 90 degrees of abduction. If you're finding that you're losing your shoulder abduction, we can do the same thing with the broom. Underhand grip. This time the elbow is going to come away from the body as you push up, holding onto that broomstick, trying to get your arm up to your ear and back down. Now notice I'm keeping my head stationary where it belongs. I'm not going to move my head to try and cheat my way into 180 degrees of shoulder abduction. Same thing, you complete it the same way, but this time coming forward, straight up into shoulder flexion, and back down. Here you're maintaining a neutral spine, and you want to make sure that you're not arching your back to kind of fake that range of motion into the shoulder 180 degrees of flexion. Okay, now that we've covered the range of motion and the mechanics needed for our overhead press without weights, we'll go to the fun part and get the weights now. For a dumbbell stand-in overhead press, you want to start with your feet about hip width apart, slight bend in your knees so you're not locking out your knees, neutral spine. I like to curl my weights up and then open up into that 90-90 positioning. So you want to maintain your height here at 90 degrees, squeezing those shoulders together, shoulders drop down away from the ears, and then you're going to push that weight up overhead to that 180 degrees abduction and slowly lower it back down. The emphasis again is on the slow part down. We want to make sure that you are controlling the weight and gravity is not controlling you, all right? Also notice as I come up, I'm not purposely clinging those weights together. I'm very mindful of my positioning and of my control, and I am also maintaining this neutral spinal alignment down and up. Now, if you're looking for variety in your overhead press, another fun way is to do unilateral training, pushing one arm up at a time. Whether you like to do that symmetrically or alternating, it's up to you, but this is a great exercise to also challenge your core. As you're pushing one weight overhead, the other side of your body is having to isometrically use your core just a little bit more functionally. If you can't maintain a neutral spinal alignment with your weights being pushed overhead, try to drop your weights. And if that still doesn't help, or you want to be able to push heavier weights, come down to a seated position. Note that I like this standing overhead press better because it is a little bit more functional if you're training for functionality. However, if you're training for more strength gains or hypertrophy, sitting is a great option to be able to lift higher weights than what you would normally be able to lift in your environment. So same thing, I'm still going to keep my back neutral, core strong, but I'm not having to worry about as much as my body mechanics below the belt line with stability to where I can use that energy and focus into my overhead press. Also notice here from the side profile that as I'm pushing overhead, I'm keeping my chin, my cervical spine neutral. I am not jutting that head forward or backwards. I'm keeping it nice and strong to reduce my risk of injury and focus on my overhead press. Now, what if you just don't have that shoulder range of motion to be able to complete the traditional overhead press? That's going to happen, and it's okay. Because again, remember, functionally, you're not working out here pushing things overhead in your normal environment. So a great way that I like to do this is by a modified overhead press using one dumbbell, holding it at your chest, more so like what you would do in an environment, and pushing overhead from this direction. This way you're more in a functional range of motion. Your shoulders are more in a flexion-based position, a little bit out into scaption depending on how wide your dumbbell is, and you're pushing weight up overhead in front of your face and down, just like you would do in a natural setting in your home. You can take the same principles of performing this standing up or sitting down based on your needs. Maybe you just don't have the shoulder range of motion to perform anything overhead, and that's okay as well too. We want to be able to strengthen our range of motion that's available, and if that's below shoulder height, we still want to increase that strength or maintain that strength for you as well. So options might be your front raise, okay? Palms are down. Sometimes you'll also find that if you point your thumbs up instead of down and perform your front raise that way, you'll have a little bit less pain just because of the anatomy of our bone structure. You can also work into a scaption raise, which is that wide positioning coming up and down. Notice that with all of these, I'm not going above my shoulder height because you're hitting the muscles where you can still strength train them without compromising your form or causing any type of injury due to pathology with pushing overhead. And then we also have our side raise, out to the side and back down. However, with those modifications for your front raise, scaption, and lateral raise, I would still encourage you to work on those active assistive range of motion exercises that we went over in the beginning, staying in a pain-free range that works for you to still try and work on your range of motion throughout your decades. And that was our overhead press, guys. Thank you so much for being here with me and going through the steps of why our overhead press is important and how we can kind of change and maneuver it to work for ourselves, our lifestyles, and our bodies. As always, please leave any comments or questions if you have any below, and subscribe so we can stay on this journey together. Thank you guys so much.